Hi everyone, I'm Iyengar, and today I'll be talking about writing a well-tested and deterministic book um, in Elixir. About a few months ago, I decided I want to write a book, and it turned out it was a lot harder than it sounds. Well, not just because it's hard to come up with the content, it's just the processes and the tools around, writing a book aren't very sophisticated, in my opinion. The tools don't empower us to write, a book that has, code and make sure the code is working and all that stuff. So yeah, this talk kind of walks you guys through, my small journey and how I tried navigating the problems that I faced while writing this book. So a little bit about me. I'm Adi Iyengar. My pronouns are he, him. Been working with Elixir for a little over 5 years. It's actually 6 years now. Should change that. I was one of the lucky people who got to start the careers as an Elixir engineer. My GitHub username is the bug catcher. My Twitter handle is laybugcatcher. Probably guess from my handles, I love catching software bugs. And I also love test-driven development, Elixir, and theoretical physics. So if people want to talk about any of this, reach out to me, and happy to have conversations about this. I can also be heard, I was going to say seen, but heard on the Elixir Mix podcast, which I think they put out put on an episode every Tuesday, I think. So check that out. Currently, I'm working at TwoFront. It's an early stage startup. We are trying to revolutionize the orthodontics industry. And I joined in as the founding engineer of the company. And it's been an amazing experience. But we're in like ship mode, and we will be in the ship mode for the next few months. So we're really looking for Elixir engineers and contractors. So if any one of you is available, again, reach out to me. We're on the pedal stack, Phoenix, Elixir, Tailwind, Alpine, and LiveView. And here's our mascot doing a little bit of moonwalk. Awesome. Also, a quick screenshot just to show you what our engineering team is in a nutshell is a screenshot of our coveralls. We're still new, so I know 100% is not huge, but yeah, we'll see how long we can maintain this. But I said test-driven development is something I'm passionate about, and this is something we'll try to keep up for as long as we can. Okay, also, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I'm writing an Elixir book right now. It's called Build Your Own Web Framework in Elixir. I'm a huge fan of learn X by building it philosophy. And this kind of takes it to the Phoenix Elixir side of things. You learn how to build your own web server, how to build controllers, routers, wrap them into a DSL using metaprogramming. Yeah, so check this book out if it sounds interesting to you. It will be published on April of 2022. And it's with Pack Publishing, who have been a delight to work with. And they've been really patient and forgiving of me with this process because, it takes a lot of patience to let your author not just write the chapters, but also write a tool to write the chapters. And they're very supportive. And if you want to work with a publisher who, is supportive and, empathizes with all these problems, reach out to them. They're really awesome. Cool. So we're going to be talking about how I started writing this book, what the processes were when I did that, and the problems I faced during that. And again, a lot of things that I talk here, you can kind of map that to just technical writing in general, because yeah, writing a book is very much like technical writing, but stretched for over a year, right? So yeah. And once we talk about the problems, we'll talk about some solutions to those problems and how I implemented those solutions in Elixir. We'll look at some code examples. We'll talk about some other features and things to consider. And hopefully at the end, I'll give a quick demo of the tool and talk a little bit more about the tool. Great. So how I started, believe it or not, Microsoft Teams is how we started. The reason why people use it is because they make just content easier to review, Teams especially. And it's not exclusive to coding, because a lot of these companies, Pact included, they just don't write coding books. They write tech books, but a lot of those tech books are like not coding heavy. So Microsoft works out for that. Microsoft Teams works out for that. And most publishers use it. Again, believe it or not, I was surprised to learn that. And it's easier to export things to other formats like PDF and EPUB and all that stuff. The problem is there's no good syntax highlighting, right? And you have to copy and paste code and all that stuff. Like, again, we'll talk about the problems. But yeah, as a result of that, it took me over 30 hours to write my first chapter. I know it's hard writing a book, but 30 hours per chapter, no, right? So there's definitely something wrong there. So let's look at the approach that I decided I want to follow while writing this book. And my philosophy was, I want to approach technical writing. I want to approach writing this book the same way I would approach writing or building a software, right? I want it to be deterministic. I want the code and every aspect of the book testable and tested, right? To test it, I have to first make it testable. And then make sure things are maintainable, right? As Elixir versions change, I don't want my code to break, right? So make sure it's easier to maintain and with least amount of effort. And it should be dry. And that's like a general engineer laziness, right? Don't repeat yourself. So yeah. So let's start to talk through some of these problems and solutions. So the first problem in Word was that there was no syntax highlighting or formatting, right? And actually the bigger problem is there's no automation around syntax highlighting and format, right? There are no built-in plugins in Word or Teams to do this. There are extensions, but they are not good. I tried out one of those extensions for some time, and the exported PDF had weird characters in it. The code part had weird characters, and I think if an ebook has a PDF, people should be able to copy and paste the code, right? That was just not possible with this, and it was also very hard to use. It took a lot of time even with that extension. And like I mentioned, it's time consuming to apply syntax highlighting manually, right? You don't want to like every code snippet make def module bold and module name red. I don't know, right? That's not what you want to spend time doing. And same goes for formatting. Like you don't want to like justify the sentences or add line breaks and page breaks. That's not what programmers should do. So the solution for me, pretty straightforward, was Markdown with something like Pandoc to interpret the Markdown. So Markdown is great because it's plain text, right? Easy to write. Developers, myself, we're already familiar with Markdown, and it has a ton of formatting and syntax highlighting automation tools. Like I mentioned Pandoc earlier. I tried ASCII doc. There's so many tools, and the support is huge. Again, more Markdown tools are there in the community than people need. That's great. So yeah, Markdown was a solution to the first problem, and it was pretty straightforward. Now the second problem is a little bit trickier. The code is prone to errors, right? And that's symptomatic of the fact that we are manually copying and pasting the code, right? And that just, you can add typos, right? There's no way to guarantee the code is working. And that is also because there's no way to test the code that's inserted between the text. Because once you insert the code between Markdown, you have to write a weird parser to like parse it out and then test it, right? That's weird. And it also makes it harder to make updates in the future for the book. Like as, again, for example, new Elixir version comes out, you have to manually go through every code and make those changes. That's just not what I want to do. Solution here is templating, right? Separating the code from Markdown. And instead of testing the code that's inserted in Markdown, test the code before you insert it in Markdown and programmatically insert that code inside the Markdown. And again, it allows us to test the code. It ensures the code is tested. And we can add stuff like CI pipelines to periodically test the code for updated versions. And again, there's so many things you could do with this, because now you've introduced a way to test. This process incentivizes testing. So how do we implement this? We use EEx in Elixir. Elixir has a powerful templating engine called EEx.smart engine, which is used by a ton of apps and has a very, very simple interface. I can just test it with packages like Phoenix, Ecto. Well, for Phoenix, actually, the HTML.ex is the EEx smart engine, right? If you do server-side rendering, and I have experience using it with a bunch of libraries. Whenever I have to do any templating, I find a reason to use EEx. I have used it for more libraries than I can think of right now. So yeah, it was a natural solution for me. Now EEx has a function called eval file, right? And its array is 3. It takes a file name, it takes the arguments or bindings, variable bindings, and third one is options, which we'll cover later. And the simplest way to use EEx is to use EEx or eval file or eval string. The flip side is that because the evaluation is runtime and not compile time, it's slow, right? But for a book, I'm fine with that. But I just wanted to point this out, that there are better ways to use EEx than eval file. Cool. So let's look at the implementation. We have this module called templates, and we define a function called generate markdown, right? And it takes a template path. Then we call EEx.eval file on the template path as first argument, pass it in assigns, and then pass it a list of options, which is and we're using functions as an option here. And what this does is it allows us to pass helper functions to the template, right? If we want people to programmatically be able to include code snippets in the Markdown, we want to provide a good interface to do that. And this helper functions allows them to keep their Markdown sane and not dirty. They can just call code snippet instead of like doing file.read and all that stuff, right? Cool. So now we can use generate markdown function to programmatically insert code into Markdown EEx files. So let's get an example. Oh, actually, before that, we have to define the code snippet function. So code snippet takes template path and some options. We're going to do some validation of the options. And also, all these functions, by the way, are a lot simpler than their actual implementation. I've hidden a lot of complexity just so it's more digestible during this talk. So yeah, if we first validate the options, I love using nimble options for that. And at the end, we just return a string, right? And this is a string that will be replaced by the code snippet call in the Markdown template. And we're going to replace the code snippet with 3 backticks, language to determine what syntax to use, right? If it's Elixir, you want it to look like Elixir, and the contents of the template. Pretty straightforward. Cool. Now we can use these 2 functions to programmatically insert code. Here's an example. Here's a code snippet, and we define a function, or a module X that has a function hello that just prints world. Pretty simple. We have a template file. It has a title, subtitle, paragraph, and that's where the code snippet call is. Oh, actually, pay attention to the extension of this, right? It's md.eex. Really being explicit about the fact that this is a template. Cool. So now code snippet function. Now this should replace line 9 to 12 with the actual code along with the syntax highlighting, right? So after calling generate markdown, it returns this markdown, generates this markdown, removes the EEx extension, still has the subtitle, paragraph, and has the code snippet right there. Great. So we solved the problem of code snippets. Now let's look at a problem that I don't think a lot of people even think about. And that's command line outputs, right? So you can't really have a coding book without shell commands. But there's no way to validate that the command line outputs are working. And there's lack of support for this too. So, your command line, if you're using Python, for example, it might change based on new versions, right? You want to make sure the command line outputs are valid. And it's especially hard to run commands that are concurrent. So for my book's example, a lot of times what we do in chapters is we start up a server in one terminal, and in another terminal, we run a curl command to test the server, right? So there's even lesser support for multiple commands. Actually, I should say there's no support. So the solution here is templating again. We can use EEx, again, the same really infrastructure we created for the command, the code snippets we can use for command. Now we need a way to run a command and capture its output, right? And then write it to a file. Once we have that, we can replace what we do with code snippets with command output and just programmatically insert the output of the command into the Markdown, just the way we do for code snippets. And here's where the power of diff comes in. We can use diff or get diff to make sure the output hasn't changed. So when we run a command's output, we add it to the source control, and the CI can run it again. And if the output has changed, CI breaks, letting us know that, hey, the command output we've inserted in the Markdown is wrong because it's changed. So you're testing your command outputs as well. Great. Now we need a way to generate the command output, right? So let's look at that. I define a new module called commands and a function called generate output. Just takes a command right now. Again, like I said, I've hidden a lot of complexity. There's before and after hooks and sleeps. I can briefly talk about that later. First thing we do is redirect IO. We want that because we want to capture it, right? We don't want the commands to print the IO in the terminal. So let's see how we do that. So we create a new string IO process, call it the new leader, right? We replace we get the current leader of the process and replace the process's current leader with the new leader. Now, what is a leader? Every Beam process is part of a group, right? And every group has a leader. And all of the IO actions go through the leader of the process group. So in order to capture the IO, you have to change the leader of that process group, right? So that's what we're doing. We first created a new string IO process. We got the old leader and changed the leader of this current process with the new leader. Great. We return the new leader and the old leader and run the shell command. Great. And remember, this will not print in the terminal. It will print in the IO process we created. Then we capture the output and reset the IO. Let's see how we do that by simply calling string.io.close. When we close an IO process, it returns the output along with some other things. Then we reset the leader to the old leader and just return the output, right? In this way, only for that shell command, we have captured the output of that shell command. Finally, we write that to a file. I'm not going to show you how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. So by using this generate command and passing it like just a string command, we can capture the output of that command and write it to a file. So now we have a file, just like the way we had a code file, right? So similar to the code file, we can use EEx to programmatically insert the command output. Here, we'll just add a new helper function, command output, just like the code snippet, right? So now there's two helper functions in the generate markdown function. Now, command output function will be very similar to the code snippet, right? It'll just take the output path this time with some options, right? We'll again validate the options. Language, we can default it to bash because it's command line output. And very similar to code snippets, we'll add backticks and the output, the contents of the output file, right? Again, this is more complex in the tool itself than here, but I've simplified it here just so it's more digestible. Cool. Now we can use that to look at an example. So here's an example command to define a command. I use JSON. We just defined a command called echo hi. This should run generate command output function, which generates this output file, which just has echo hi, right? And in the template, the EEx file, we have again a subtitle, paragraph, but instead of code snippet, we call it command output, right? And the language is bash. So after calling generate markdown, this should give us a final markdown with this example, .md without the extension, EEx extension. Again, subtitle, paragraph, the way they were in the template, but command output as bash. Cool. A few other features to that was needed in this tool. Need the support for final conversion of to PDF and EPUB. We need to support relative line numbers and code chunks. It can only add specific parts of the code. And needed a before and after hook, right? And that's because, if you're testing a web server, for example, right? Before the curl command, you need to start the web server. And after the curl command, you want to stop the web server, right? So added a support for before and after hooks, and just JSON configuration. So the tool itself is more, reusable. Yeah. So let's talk about the Elixir package. So it's named the Right Writer. Credit to my friend Josh Adams. This is not Josh Adams. There's a different Josh Adams, but he's like my a nomenclature guy. He always comes up with awesome names. He said the Right Writer, and I was like, I'm gonna name it the Right Writer. I'll be making it open source in 2022, and I'll show you guys a very quick demo of the package. So as you can see here, this is a Markdown file with just Pandoc headers for formatting. There's a few Markdown.ex files. The second one has a few bullet points. The third one has a code snippet, which itself is a Markdown. So we're embedding a Markdown using code snippets. And the fourth one has a command output for starting a web server, right? So let's run this. I'll call make book. It should be done quickly. Awesome. And there's a new file. Awesome. So let's open that. So we use the Right Writer to generate the docs for the Right Writer here. So as you can see, it generated a book with contents. If you click in contents, you can see that it added the code snippet, which itself is a Markdown, and the final command line output. And since all of these things are separate now, it allows us to test both the command outputs and code snippets and make sure that our book is deterministic and well tested.